Okay, before the break, we looked at a couple things we hadn't really seen yet. Well, the camera was similar to something we did with the camera. Used the built-in cinemachine package in Unity. It's a really, really nice tool. Makes that work a whole lot easier. Cameras can be one of the trickier things to put together in a script. If you want to do that on the tutorials, it'll be fine to use that easy camera instead of what the tutorial has. Probably save you a little bit of time as well. And then we set up another level, and with our debug run button up here in Unity for testing and getting everything put together, we can only look at one scene at a time, which isn't really how games should go together. We need a way to move between those scenes. So I'm just going to do it as a simple collision. I'll start over in the desert and make a new object here. So right click in the hierarchy, and under 3D object, one of the options is a sphere. Just put that in a really strange place. We're going to pick a spot kind of close to the ground. And with 3D stuff, you always want to look from a couple different angles and make sure you're looking at the angle you think you are. Maybe I'll scale it up bigger. 3 by 3 by 3. Here we go. Nice big sphere. Something a little bit above the ground so our dragon can bump into it at some point. That's probably a good spot for it. And then our dragon, since when we applied the laws of physics, we already have the physics as well as the box collider. The collider is the main thing. So it's ready to collide with other objects. So on that sphere, well, using the default sphere instead of a fancy mesh from the other side, or made in Blender, using the sphere from Unity, it did include a collider with it. There is a difference though. The original, when I scaled that sphere up, that's only the graphics. The collider, what the computer processes is actually considers being that sphere, the boundary of it is still at the original size. So we need to make that match our sphere or something close to it. Or click the edit one and just adjust it till it looks like it's about the same size as the sphere. Because notice the number it gave me. 0.59 for the radius. But the sphere started with a scale of 1 and a radius of 0.5 on the collider. I scaled it up 3 times bigger, and we only went from 0.5 to 0.59 on that scale. So they're not using the same thing. The mesh and the colliders do not use the same scale value. On boxes, it's okay. Boxes use the same scale value. But spheres and capsules and cylinders seem to use a different scale value. So you want to be careful with that. Because for a 3 meter sphere, our radius should be 1.5 meters. But that's obviously way too big. But now that has a collider, we can collide with it and make things happen. So I'm going to rename it. I'll call it Gateway. So a nice model might look better, something that looks like a big arch or a gate. When we walk into it, our character transports to the other level. We'll just do a super simplified version of that where there's a sphere in front of us, and when we bump into it, we move to the other level. When we create something new, though, we want to give it a material, well, at least a color. There's usually more for final products. There's probably a lot more that we want to include than just the color, the texture of it, the surface, how shiny or dull is it, but all those things in the material. So I'm going to create a new material and choose a color for the gate, maybe like yellow-ish. Yeah, bright yellow will work. And make it very metallic so it looks all shiny and choose emissions so that it's kind of throwing off. So it looks like it's throwing off light and not just reflecting light of a color. That way, because we haven't really seen anything. We haven't really seen anything else. So I made it yellow, turned the metallic way up. Maybe smoothing this down. And then click that checkbox for emission and got different options here. So I said something yellowish, which hopefully looks like, hopefully it looks like it's emitting light now or glowing. Then we can apply that to that sphere. Once we have a material, just select the sphere in the hierarchy and then drag the material over as a component. So that doesn't really seem to look like it's emitting the light very well. Turn that up more. Never changes. Oh, that doesn't seem to be changing it much. I was expecting it to look more like it's glowing, but there's other material. There's other libraries of materials that have better things for that. This isn't in our class, so we're not going to get too deep into materials, but there are options to make things look like they're glowing or transparent or all that stuff that we want to. We have to define the material for it, basically. We've talked about that before. Now that will be the gateway to get to our other world. And we can put the actual control for it in the script for our player. This is another thing that can happen with our player. Our player can collide with that. So I'm gonna go ahead and open that script we were doing the other day. We have the update, start and update method. And on this one we inherited from mono behavior, there are some other methods that we can go ahead and use from that. So after the update method, I'm going to make a new method, start a new method, public void, or you can just say void. Public is implied in C#, so if we don't put a keyword, it becomes public. In Unity, we have on our data fields, we need to put public to make it show up on the interface, our editor. But for our methods, we don't really need those on the interface. You can probably leave off the public word, and that way it matches what the template did. Public void start, and we just leave off the public part. A void method called on collision enter. And it needs a couple things. Let's look at the documentation to see what it needs. We haven't looked at documentation much in here. So I'll just search for on collision, enter Unity. And that enter probably lets you know that there's also an on collision stay and an on collision exit. So enter is when the collision first happens. Stay is during the entire time it's colliding. And exit is when the collision stops. So 3 different ways we can define what happens when things collide. I'll just use enter, and Unity has huge support. They have tons of forums, both official ones and unofficial ones, just from people that like to do Unity. Lots and lots and lots of tutorials available online. And the official documentation, just docs.unity.3D, is really nice as well. Most of the official documentation includes examples. A lot of things leave examples out of their official documentation. You just have to figure out what to do from there. And lots of links to see what all is there. So on collision enter brings in a collision object or collision type of data. So we'll get that in our script. So there's some collision type of data, and I'm just going to call it collision because that seems like a good name for it. But then what do we have with that collision data? What does that mean? And the Unity documentation is also full of links. So we can just follow the link and see everything about the collision. So with that thing that will automatically be passed into the method, we have quite a few things. So articulation body or a body for rigid body. We haven't really talked about articulation bodies. That it's a little more advanced, but we talked about rigid bodies. That's the thing the laws of physics apply to. Collider, so that's the actual thing, the boundary, yeah, the box, the sphere, box collider, the mesh collider. We actually get that information. The contact, how many of the vertexes in the mesh collided, so we can get that count. Or we can get the contacts. We can actually get access to those meshes that collided. That's important for like, say, a racing game. Right? If your car hits a wall, the car should probably look smashed afterwards, accurately for how it hit the wall. In a racing game, you might hit a brick wall at 200 miles an hour, or you might hit a brick wall at 5 miles an hour. And you don't want the same thing to happen to your car in both cases. Game object, that sounds really, really useful. That sounds like that's what we would consider as the thing we would hit. The computer is going to process the colliders or what interacted, but the way we think about games, it's that our objects are what collided. We can get the game object from it. So if we have that collision, we just call it collision, or I did when I typed it. That's a reference value, so you can call that whatever you want as long as the data type is collision. And it has a game object, so we can say collision.gameObject. And then game objects have a bunch of things. Does that go over into okay, that went to I was expecting it to go to the sheet for collision, but since or to the sheet for game objects overall, but since we were on the collision thing, the link instead sent us to an example of a game object in a collider. So collision.object, I was going to use name, but sometimes tags can be more useful. Right? We might have 30 enemies in a scene, and they all need a unique name for the computer to keep them straight. But we don't want to keep track of all those names and do something special in our code for every single one. So we could just give all of them an extra little tag, like a name tag that says enemy, basically. And then all we have to check is if we collided with an enemy or a gateway or something like that. I was going to use name was my plan instead of tag because we only have one of them, but there's multiple options. And, oh, I guess this is the link for the actual, yeah. So here's what all we have once we get into game object. The properties, constructors, lots of different methods about it, lots of different git component methods, send messages, find stuff, flags, name, that's the one I was going to use, destroy, don't destroy, booleans, lots of things there. I was just going to point at the documentation. They have really nice documentation full of links. And then that thing that I didn't realize was going to happen when we click the game object from the collision, it goes to another example. Their documentation is also full of examples, so you can see how to use these things, not just read about them. I'm going to use name instead of tag, or, well, tags are useful. Why don't we put a tag on that? And then we can use tag. But when you search for something, I think you all probably know the tricks, right? Just make sure you include the word Unity in the search, and then the official documentation should be right near the top. And like all official documentation, it usually has the word docs in the address for it. So on our gateway, I'll go to the gateway, and we have what's written here in the hierarchy, that's the name, right? We right click, we get an option to rename it. So that's the object's name, and then over here, right at the top, well, the name's also written here. We can rename it over here as well. But right below that, you'll see the layer it's on and a tag. So we could also use either one of those. So like for that enemy example I was talking about, we could make an enemy layer, and it's not a visibility layer. It doesn't affect visibility. It's an interaction layer. So, and we can define how things interact, which mention it. Just to point towards it, if we go to project settings, under, where's it, preferences? Might be under preferences. I don't see the option I was looking for. Oh, there it is. Under physics, here's our interaction layers. So all the layers we have, we can check and uncheck them so that sometimes our two things don't, we can put them on different layers and they won't interact at all. Or they'll have lots of interaction. We can define all that stuff. But that's getting into into Unity a little bit deeply. That's not a generalized purpose. We often have layers. Really what a layer is an array. So if you're somewhere where you script everything, just put all your enemies in an extra array, or a reference to your enemies in a list, and then just check that list instead of checking each particular enemy. Like Pygame, because it's really easy in Pygame. So you put a reference to all of your enemy objects into a list, and it's not a copy of them, because a list is, in Python, a list only has pointers. So a list only has reference values referring to data that's actually stored somewhere else. And then in Python, you can just say for, or use it in the selection structure. If collision.gameObject in enemy list. That's what an interaction layer is. And tags are just like little strings that we can add to things to identify them. So I'll use a tag. We don't have any yet, so let's add a new tag and call this gateway. Might as well give it the same name as the thing. So then anytime we run into something called a gateway, we can identify that collision based off the tag, which you can think of like a little name tag. It's separate from our data, it's just stuck to it, but it's always going to be there. And again, like we saw with layers, if I click on gateway again, notice it still says untagged. So even though I went here to get to that button, this always throws me off because it seems like it should have changed that. The button goes someplace else entirely and doesn't change this one. So we do have to come back and change gateway. Same thing with layers. When you click the button, even if you click it from here, it doesn't change this this one. We have to come back and do that. So now we have a little tag we can refer to. So go back over to our scripts. We have our collision, and we'll just check that. If collision.gameObject.tag is equal to the string gateway. Which we only have one gateway right now, but if we have lots of gateways, we can do the same thing. If we want to do something. And what we're going to do is set up the scene manager. I'll go back to the documentation again. Because me rattling all this stuff off my head, it took a long time before I had it memorized and could just rattle it off my head. Definitely longer than 8 weeks, which would be our whole course. We're only doing 4 weeks on Unity. Definitely took longer than 4 weeks to get really, really comfortable with it. I'm just gonna look for it. Scene manager, Unity. I was trying to think of a good lead in to know what to search for, but I couldn't think of any words just because I already have looked it up before. And it's something that we use a lot. I guess the name kind of makes sense. We need to manage our scenes. You could put the whole question in Google, like how to move between scenes in Unity, and then hopefully somewhere near the top, you'll see the word scene manager pop up. You're like, oh, that sounds like the object I need. But that's one that's going to show up a lot. So you want to remember scene manager. The class is found in Unity Engine.scene management. I skipped that a moment ago. That's an important thing in the documentation. Because our previous one, collision, is in Unity Engine. We have system collections for generics, and Unity Engine. So we don't have Unity Engine.scene management. So for that, we do need to import that other library. And that was the reason I went back to the documentation to show that, because we didn't see it the first time. So we need the using Unity Engine scene management folder is what it really is. We have a fancy name for it. Unity Engine.scene management folder, and then that has a whole bunch of files in it. One of those files being a script, being a C++ C++ object. A C++ object called scene manager, or a class. And once we have that class file, then we can create an instance of that class or an object in there. You can see the methods, create a scene, so they can be created on the fly. I would kind of recommend against doing that in your code, right? Just a quick glance at our scene. I would kind of recommend against doing that entirely in your code. We have powerful tools to do that, but we have the capability to create it. Get scene, load scene, that sounds useful. That sounds like a way to move between scenes. Obviously, yeah. I knew what it was beforehand, I almost rattled it off. I was going to rattle off of my mind like we've been doing, but this is the sort of thing you all have to do because we're very restricted in time in class, right? But even on you don't even have to go to the tutorials. The official documentation has lots of examples and links, and is put together very, very thoroughly. Can't remember if I've said it here or not. My general recommendation for those who haven't had me in another programming class, I always say use the tutorials to learn to read the user manual. The official documentation, that's the user manual for Unity. It will always stay up to date. It has the full picture. tutorials only ever have the starting point. They just have those first couple steps, and they definitely don't have the whole picture. They're going to simplify it. Like a tutorial on the scene manager is only going to probably show at most 3 of those methods, and they won't even mention the other ones. So my recommendation is always look at the official documentation first, and it's a user manual, so it's going to be boring and oftentimes hard to follow. Then go find a nice, easy to follow tutorial, and when you see what to do, then come back to the user manual and see what was confusing you the first time. Use the tutorials to learn to read the user manual, not just how to do one individual step. Because then all you learned is that one individual step, and you'll have to look up the next step again. So I always want to come there, start on load scene. Oh, there's an example. Scene manager.load scene. That sounds easy. Look at the next example. Asset bundle. So that's loading scenes from somewhere else. Third example down here, scene manager.load scene, and then the name of the scene we want. So that sounds pretty pretty easy to work with. I don't see an example that's typed the same way I type it. And we can also pass in parameters. It is overloading. If there's things we need when we move to that next scene, right? Like maybe we don't want to restart our character's health value at the next scene. If they were barely struggling at the end of the scene, because usually that's a save point, we don't want them to fully recover just because they walked into the next room. Like their health is still going to be pretty low, but that is often going to be used as a save point. So we would need to pass that health value on to the next scene. Or experience level might be another one. Any experience they gained in that first scene would be lost when they go to the second scene. So we often need to pass things back and forth. So over in our script, did I close that already? We'll pull that back up because there's one more we need. We only have one script, right? So we need to know which scene are we going to. So, oh, here we go. So load scene will get us to the other scene, and unload scene. There's also things like get scene by name. I don't see the method I usually use. I thought there was just a load scene and a get scene, but maybe I get the scene from somewhere else. Searches to the scenes loaded for a scene with the given name. Oh, and then notice those indexes that we put in the build, we can also use that. So we can either use the name or the index. I'll use one of those. That's the only one we'll look at. And what I originally had in mind, I was probably going to type a different object than the one we just talked about because I don't see the method name that I was actually planning on using. And just out of habit, I would have typed it without thinking about it. So if we collide with that gateway, that's when we want to go to the other scene. But other scene is relative. We're going to put a gateway in the other scene as well. And it's going to come back. So we need to know which scene we're at. So we can just check that. So if scene manager dot get scene name, oh, there was, oh, get scene by name, get scene by name, if that is equal to, wait, is that the one I want? Create scene, get active scene, that'll work. That'll work better. So instead of searching for them, let's just get active scene. So if the current scene is equal to desert, that's where we're going to start at. We'll make sure that's the right thing. Scene, get active scene. I might need a dot name. It's already is loaded. Oh, dot name. I'll look at that really quick. So I just navigated through to that scene object, the thing we're actually getting back, that type of data, and there's a name attribute we can grab. And I know the name of the scene. That's what the file's called. So the scene's called either desert or meadow. So get active scene dot name, if that's equal to desert, which that's a lot cleaner than what I originally had in mind. And we looked at documentation. That's probably a more useful thing than you just type in some code. Oh, the wrong thing seems to be showing on the screen. You know, on the Zoom call, hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. It froze up, but it looks like it's back now. Screen sharing has failed. What? Oh, that one's working. Maybe it's my laptop. Let me log off and back on here. Okay, yeah. The other one didn't even leave. So laptop must have messed up. There it goes. And eventually, maybe. Oh, screen share. Oh, it kicked me off Zoom. Okay. I think the Wi-Fi went now. There we go. So I came over here and went in the scene object and then looked at the different things we could access one of those names. And I think somewhere around there is where the screen share stops. So the scene manager get active scene returns that scene data. So once we have that, we say dot name, and I know what the name of it is. The name is what we call the file. Which it looks like it's bogging down again. Close the browser, see if that helps. Oh, for some reason the screen share is going like 30 seconds behind. That's not good. Oh, Well, that's a little inconvenient. Keep getting kicked out of the Zoom meeting. Oh, now the Wi-Fi went away. That's what it is. Sorry, we're almost finished for today. It's about, we have a selection structure left to right, and then that'll be it for today. But for some reason, the Wi-Fi is not working. Oh, that would be. Okay, says I'm back in the meeting. Let me try that again. Hopefully, oh, there we go. So, here's where we're, so we got that scene data, so we got the name compared to ours. And if that's the case, then we can use the scene manager. And that method we looked at, load scene. And then give the name of the scene we want to load. We want to load the meadow. I'll go ahead and write the whole thing in case it, the other point I was gonna make, right now we only have 2 scenes. But over the years, I found it's a lot better to, instead of relying on the else structure, just do an if, else if. And that way there is explicitly a condition every time. Makes it a lot easier to expand, because if you need to do any expansion, you have to come back and add a condition to something. But it can make a difference to have that control. Else if scene manager get active scene, which is a method, and that brings back scene data. And if the name stored in that data is equal to meadow, then we'll have the scene manager load the desert scene. And then we need to import that library. Oh, already did. I thought I forgot to, I didn't think I'd done that yet. So with the library loaded in, we just check our collision, and that collision includes a game object, which is probably what we're thinking about. We're not thinking about the collider or every single vertex in the mesh and all of that. We're thinking about the object we hit. Then we can use tags and names and all of that stuff.
So would you put it, so if you had multiple gateways in this thing, so you would still have that same wait on collision enter, and then I guess you would go down the if else if, and then another if statement with the if else. Between those two.
You keep nesting them, if I'm understanding you correctly.
Right. So yeah. So
So you said multiple gateways, so
right.
That's where our name would fail us, because right now our tag and name were both gateways, we only have one. But yes, we could keep all the normal nesting stuff, however deeply you need to go. So we have that collision object is a parameter passed in, so we have that until we hit this curly brace down here. So any place we need to use it, we can go back to the original data and grab something other than the game object and build up. That would be a lot closer to normal than what we do than what fits in the classroom example. We're restricted on time, but when we're making a game, we want to have lots of control over every single thing. The control is nice. That's why over the years I found that instead of doing an if else, I'll just do an if else if, and that way I explicitly have the condition every single time. And usually never do a default version. So I'll save that. I do want to do one thing. I already looked at this. I'm going to go back to those build settings. just to show this, and I'm gonna remove these. So I'm gonna remove it so it looks like there's no scenes in our game. Because that's a common error to happen. That's sort of an odd place, right? We don't go there till everything's finished. Usually we don't go there when debugging stuff. Oh, there's the yellow thing. So I come over here and this way. And when I collide with it, I'm getting an error message in the console. Scene Meadow couldn't be loaded because it has not been added to the build settings. So we have to have it in the build for the game before the debugging stuff can even get there. Didn't want to show that error. So one more time, how to do that. If you see that error, that's an easy one to forget because this seems more like a final step whenever we're ready to like, I don't have the button. On the Android, there's a button to prepare it for the Google Play Store. So when we have that basically attach the price tag to it is when we think about this stuff. But we have to add our open scenes here. Add that one. Then go over to the other scene. Oh, save. And add this. Build settings. Add open scene. There we go. And I guess we don't have a gateway here yet. So we're gonna go back to the desert, make sure that works once first. And then once it works once, we can just copy and paste it over. Start walking here somewhere. And restriction. There we go. And when we collide with it, it jumps over to the other seat. So something that looked better than the sphere would be nice there, like a big archway. And then when we walk through that archway, we just automatically teleport. That would look fancier with, that might fit the dragon and everything. I think of dragons usually, are usually associated with magical things, like walking through a doorway that sends you to another world. And then the same thing over here, we just need a copy of that. So I can make it an entirely new one, or probably easiest just to hit copy and paste. Actually, I'm going to make an entirely new one. I'm going to go over here, and on this world, instead of using that sphere, I'll use a cube. There we go. Put it somewhere we can actually get to it. Okay, so we're about the water or something. That'll good. I think we can get to that spot, and then under assets, I can apply the same material to it. It still has the box collider. Maybe make that a little bit bigger, like we did on the last one. On this one, if we make our cube 3 by 3 by 3, the size is, oh, there's what a 3 by 3 by 3 cube size looks like. So we still get that strange thing. 1, 1, 1. The sizes on the gliders and the meshes are different, so you got to watch out for that. Bring it. Oops. Oh, apply that same material so our gateway is still yellow, and bring that a little bit above the surface. And what really mattered there, remember, was the tag. So that's all we're checking on. I'll keep calling that one cube and just give it the gateway tag. So now when it checks tags, even though we're in a different level, a different object altogether, a different name, different shape, different level, it still has that same name, wearing that same little name tag. So the code will think it's the same thing. So if we run this, then that should get us back to the other level. This way. Which the right and left are backwards now because we were looking at it from the front the other day, so I need to change that. I got us this level. And this one gets us back to the other level. Our camera's still following us, moving us up and down. And a lot of similar components. I tried to pick things the stuff we see every single time covering class because we are very restricted on time. Obviously, we can't cover every single button in Unity. This one that says window is an entire, every one of these is another panel full of buttons. We definitely don't have time to touch on that in class. I'm gonna fix that thing in the script. Because the other day our camera wasn't moving, so we were looking straight at the thing. And there the left and right were strange, so we had to switch them around. And we did that by making our X position, we subtracted it so the negative become positive and positive become negative. So if we just switch that back to plus, then we're back to the original negative plus, and A is left and D is right. Which with the camera behind the dragon won't be as confusing. I keep going in the wrong direction. Make sure that's saved. And I keep calling this level 1, so I'll think about starting here. And on the game tab, there's a little checkbox. Oh, did they get rid of did they get rid of one of the checkboxes? There used to be a checkbox to preview the game in full screen mode. They move it over here. Oh. Whoops, I did not mean to do that. Put that back in here somewhere. There used to be a checkbox right up here that would preview the game in full screen instead of that little window. Yeah.
Isn't that where play focus?
Oh, yes. They changed the label on it. Thank you. It used to just, oh, now there's options. It used to just be a checkbox. So I guess they added a third option. I didn't read the documentation on the latest version of Unity. I just installed it and started going with it. What used to be a checkbox now has 3 options. So under play focus, we can play maximize, and then get a full screen view of our game. Much better mouse movement at this size too. Oh, that's better. Now the left goes left and right goes right in more normal ways. And when we hit the little gateway, it jumps us over to our other world. Ready to fly. We should probably have something set up so that we can't like fall in the water and all that stuff. But that's more of parts we've already seen. Okay. Just add a collider to that water area. Just to throw an extra box collider out there that only surrounds that. Then if we collide with that water, something different happens than when we collide with the rest of our land. And when we hit this, we go back to our other scene. So a few basic parts, still a long, long way from a finished project, but that's the tools we need to make that finished product. So I'm going to send this out. Let me go ahead and do that before we wrap up. Does anybody have any questions about that? I'm going to go ahead and close all this before I put it in a zip folder and send it to you. I'll do meeting. Documents, Unity, 3D example. Put that in the zip folder. How big is it? $321 megabytes. I'll put a link on Ivy Learn to download it. So zip. I don't think that one will go out with an announcement. Announcements will allow for larger files than a regular email, but I still think, I'm pretty sure 300 is still a little bit big for that. So I'll just load it in the files and put a link in an announcement. There's our course, here it is. Files. This should work. Instead of putting it on my own server, that would be probably quicker and easier. I have more control over it, but I'm already here now, so. Which hopefully won't take too long. And a new tab. Here is the 3D and Unity. From this week. I guess that was quicker than that didn't take as long as I thought it was going to take. There you go. So y'all can download that example. It is 300 megabytes, so it'll take a second to download. Definitely too big to put in an email, and I'm pretty sure too big to put in a regular announcement even. Unity projects do get very large very quickly. Does anybody have any questions about anything? I think I already asked that. I see head shaking no here. Asked that a moment ago and haven't heard anything. I'm gonna bypass the 5-second one. So that'll wrap things up for today. That leaves us a whole bunch of time, an hour and 42 minutes that should be blocked off on your schedule already that says this is game dev last time. Week 7, so you, some of y'all might have some past due homework. Please get any past due homework to me as soon as possible. Everything has to be turned in by December 18th. There's final projects coming up, essays. Some things aren't due to the end of the semester. Most people take more than one course. So I assume you have stuff to do as we approach the end of week 7 on an 8-week course. There's probably plenty of stuff to do. As always, I am pretty much just going to be sitting here waiting for questions to come my way until our scheduled block of time ends at 4:50. And then next week we will continue looking at 3D stuff. We haven't really seen having a computer controlled character yet. Depending on our time constraints, it'll probably be an NPC instead of an enemy, but they work very similar. We use collisions and ray casting to determine if we hit the enemy or not. That stuff's fairly straightforward. We might have time for it next week. I guess that is an important thing. And that, and maybe put together a cutscene, the basic components, and with whatever time we have left, then look at some of the really useful tools in Unity. There's lots and lots of them out there. Otherwise, please use our time productively. That's why I'm ending the lecture short so early, because there's lots and lots and lots of stuff I could talk about with Unity still. But at this point in the semester, I'm thinking time to work on stuff is probably much more important. We've seen the basic components for Unity, so now we need time to work and apply them. Give that cinemachine camera a try. That will be easier than what the tutorial has you do with cameras, so feel free to use that in the tutorial assignment as well. Otherwise, I will see you all on Monday. Everybody have a good weekend. And let me know if you have any questions.